Star Wars 7x7, episode 2177. Yesterday, we did the no spoiler review of Vader Immortal, episode 2. Today, we're going to get into spoiler territory and talk about what actually happens in Vader Immortal, episode 2, and also why it is that we're going to talk about these spoilers. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, before we get into spoiler territory for Vader Immortal Episode 2, the question that occurred to me, and this is just, me going, Self, why are you doing this? But, it's one thing when we talk about, story elements of, say, novels or comics, for example, where, we don't really go into every single detail of things. And so there's still, even with the spoiler episodes for novels, for example, there's still a lot to learn and discover when you actually read the novel for yourself. So even though I'm delivering spoilers, there's still, a lot that's there. So it's not like I'm completely destroying the experience. At least that's my philosophy about things. And as it pertains to video games and virtual reality, I personally think that part of the joy of it is actually playing it. And so in that instance, with video games, well, we've talked through walkthroughs of things, like with Battlefront 2 with the story mode that they had in there, for example. So we didn't necessarily cover every single detail, but we certainly covered a lot of it. I would say a lot more than we do on the novel side of things. And it's going to be the same, and it was actually the same with episode 1 of Vader Immortal, because a lot of the joy is in the actual experience. I mean, it's one thing for me to tell you that there is a scene where Vader walks up on you and it feels like he is right in front of your face and looking down on you, and you can just feel your heart rate tripling. It's ridiculous, the power of that moment. You have to experience that for yourself. So even telling you what the deal is with the story, yeah, that's one thing, and sure, it's fine. And because this is spoiler territory, you can decide whether you want to listen to it or not. But even if you hear it, it's still not the same as actually having the experience in virtual reality. And that's why we're going to go into full spoiler territory for Vader Immortal Episode 2 right here. So that's your fair warning. And now we're going to get into it. So the story starts, as we talked about yesterday, with Vader basically recapping where we're at from the end of episode 1. And ultimately, his goal is to train you to be able to survive and get to the Bright Star, and that involves your Force training. So that's how you get to start learning how to use the Force and using your controllers and the game mechanics for manipulating the Force. And then, unfortunately for you and Vader, a giant Rancor attacks out of nowhere, and it's rather shocking and surprising when it happens. And ultimately, in the midst of that fight, there's a giant collapse of the floor of the room that you're in, and Vader can't save you and deal with the Rancor, and so you fall into nothingness. And oh my gosh, like the experience of that is just super vertigo inducing when you're in virtual reality. It's like, like it is not fun. And I mean that in the sense of, holy cow, it is really realistic and amazing in that regard. It's just that, for me, the notion of falling, like that is not a comfortable thing. So it accurately replicated that experience for me. And at that point, you basically have a sort of mysterious vision experience with that enigmatic character, the Black Bishop, who has somehow managed to pause time for all intents and purposes and tell you that he has had a terrible vision of the future where if Vader gets his hands on the Bright Star, that whole worlds and galaxies will crumble within his grasp. And so the Black Bishop wants you to get the Bright Star and return it to the Mustafarians in the hope that they will be able to take it and undo the damage that was done by Lady Corvax when she was trying to bring her beloved husband back from the dead. And there's a whole thing about how the Black Bishop is cursed and he's stuck between this world and the next, whatever that may mean. It's not necessarily a reference to, the living force and the cosmic force exactly, but the mind it leans in that direction basically. And you're also supposed to, get a hold of a light sword and use that to help unlock the Bright Star for you to be able to give it back to the Mustafarians. There's also talk of crystal mines that were on Mustafar that were used to power the Aeon engine, but the fate of those mines is unknown at this point, and whether they were actually kyber crystals, well, they're kind of colored like kyber crystals, but they, we don't know necessarily what those are, at least not yet. So as you go through the various trials and tribulations to get to the Bright Star, I should point out that you've actually been separated from Vader, so that moment where you get dropped after Vader can't deal with both you and the Wild Rancor, you're separated from Vader for most of the rest of the episode. And that's similar basically to what happens in episode 1, because at one point, you're locked up, and then you break out of prison in episode 1 and you spend time, moving around the joint. And so you're not with Vader in those situations either. Anyway, suffice it to say, surprise, surprise, you find the Bright Star, you get the Bright Star, and it's great. And you've been going around with that one Mustafarian who was in prison with you from episode 1, and you give the Bright Star to him, and he says, "I'm sorry." And Zoe 3 is like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's great." Wait, why are you saying sorry? And his take is that, all we have to do is give Vader the Bright Star, and then he'll leave Mustafar, and that'll be great. And when he says that, you're like, oh no, that's not how this is going to work. And suddenly Vader shows up and takes the Bright Star and says, "Yeah, see you later. And do you think I was really going to make you my apprentice? You're a means to an end." And he gets rid of you. He throws you down yet another giant pit, and you have to deal with Rancors again. And thankfully, at the last minute, you are saved by other Mustafarians and the Mustafarian priestess that we met from the first episode. And she says that the only way we're going to solve this is to attack Vader's castle. And thankfully, you have an army to do that, which is implied to be a bunch of Mustafarians, and that's where things get left on the cliffhanger for the end of episode 2 of Vader Immortal. And so there you go. That is the deal with episode 2 of Vader Immortal. We will talk about episode 3. That's going to be coming down the line. We've got a couple of weeks coming up here on the show where we have a few other topics on the schedule to cover. So we will get there definitely and soon. But for now, that's going to do it for our conversation about Vader Immortal, and that is going to do it for this episode of the show as well. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.